Hey YouTube, today I'm going to be doing a kind of an interesting video. So this is going to be all about PCIe Gen 5. So the very first Phison controller based, so Phison E26 controller for SSDs for PCIe Gen 5 are now available out in the wild. So Micro Center with their Inland brand, they're one of the first ones. They might actually be the first one in North America to actually sell these in retail outlets. As of the time of filming, you can't get these anywhere else. You can't get them on Amazon. You can't get them on Newegg. The only other one that I know of is one that's sold in Japan from like a Japanese local reseller. So this is kind of like a world's first sort of thing. It's like the first, up to 10,000 read speed, up to 9,500 or 9,500 write speed. So that's 9.5 gigabytes per second and 10 gigabytes per second. It has active cooling on it, so we're going to unbox it here, but that's kind of what it looks like. It's the TD510, so if you search Inland TD510, this is going to come up. So you guys know, if you pay attention to my channel, I've talked a lot about like different SSDs recently. So I have a number of like older SSDs that I've been using. So like a SATA based Samsung QVO. So this is QLC, so the endurance isn't really that great on it. And then the 970 Evo Plus, that's TLC based. That's a little bit better, or quite a bit better in terms of endurance. But the endurance doesn't really matter too much for regular consumers. So Micro Center has anything from this entry-level PCIe Gen 3 NVMe, a more decent PCIe Gen 3 offering, so the Prime. So all of these are just examples of ones that I actually use in my systems today. And then there's PCIe Gen 4 there with the heatsink for the PlayStation 5. So this one's perfect for the PS5. In fact, this is actually in my PS5. So this is up to 7,000 megabytes per second. It's kind of where it tops out on the Gen 4, whereas Gen 5 theoretically can do double that, so about 14,000, I should say. And then the first generation of Gen 5 now is starting at 10,000, so already starting way above Gen 4. So let's go ahead and open it. So it just opens right up. There's like one thing there, and then it comes out like this. So this is basically it. And what I'm curious to know is, so it does have active cooling, although I don't really know if this will be needed unless you're doing some kind of work use case where it's going to be constantly reading from the drive. Then it could actually heat up and it might actually need this. But the heatsink on this is pretty robust. It's hollowed out so they get more surface area. I'm curious to know though, like if this is double-sided, because if it's double, if all the chips are on the front side, the better thing to do would be to remove this and put the big massive heatsink that comes with like an X670E motherboard. So that kind of leads me into the next discussion point with these like Gen 5 drives. If you actually are interested in getting one of these, I will note that you do need to be on a platform that supports Gen 5. So that leads me to why there's all these CPU boxes here in the back. So currently, if you're on like Zen 2, so like Ryzen 3000 or Ryzen 5000, forget about this because this is too new for these platforms. So that automatically eliminates anybody who's on like Ryzen 3000, 5000 and older. And then if you're on Intel, if you're on anything older than 12th gen, you also can't really do Gen 5. So if you're on, say, like 11th gen Rocket Lake, for instance, the highest this one goes is Gen 4. So that kind of brings me to another point. If you are someone who is really enthusiastic about like SSD benchmarking and read and writes and queue depth and all that kind of stuff, the platform of choice, in my recommendation, is going to be X670 or B650, or X670E or B650E. So basically the new modern Ryzen 7000 series processors are going to be your best bet. And the reason why that is those motherboards have dedicated PCIe Gen 5 lanes that are wired specifically for storage. If you are wanting to do this on an Intel-based platform, you know, like the 12th Gen Alder Lake or the 13th Gen Raptor Lake, do know that, first of all, you have to have the newer Z690 motherboard, unless you're going to be using like a PCIe add-in card to connect this to, and then use up what would have been your graphics card slot. So that's not really something that a lot of people are going to do. So that basically means you're going to have to be on the Z790 platform. However, the only drawback that I do want to point out for anybody who is thinking about getting a Gen 5 drive and they're on an Intel-based platform, it has to be Z790. And do note that you will lose half of your graphics card lanes as soon as you populate the top drive that is capable of doing Gen 5. That is a platform limitation on Z790. There's no motherboard out there that supports an Intel CPU on the consumer desktop today that can work around that. It's just a limitation that you need to be aware of if you want to go to Gen 5 and you're on an Intel 12 or 13 Gen on a Z790. Now, if you're on AMD, if you're on something like a X670 or an X670E, then you're good to go, because these, or even B650, will have a dedicated PCIe Gen 5 slot. So, and it doesn't peel away any lanes from the graphics card. So you can still run this drive and still get the full 16 lanes of bandwidth for your graphics card on an AM5 platform. So that's why I think for most people that are going to be serious about benchmarking or testing this, along with like gaming on a high-end GPU, they're going to want to do these sort of tests on an AM5 platform, unless they're okay with running their graphics card at X8 speed. So let's go ahead and install this in my Ryzen 7 7700X based system and kind of show like how you would install this weird looking monstrosity. I don't really know if this is actually needed. Okay, to install this SSD into an existing PC, we're going to need to first remove the graphics card. Unless you have a water-cooled CPU, then it's relatively easy to get at it, but because I have this giant Noctua cooler up here, I'm going to have to essentially remove my ARC A770 first so I can get at the PCIe Gen 5 slot. So this is an X670 non-E, so that means that it has a single set of 4 lanes of Gen 5 dedicated to a storage drive, in this case, a PCIe Gen 5 SSD. If you have an X670E platform, like the Aorus Master, then you can actually run 2, maybe possibly even more, if you were going to not use a graphics card, for instance. So you're really just going to have to refer to your motherboard's manual to determine like how many you can run. So right there, that is the Gen 5 slot. So we're going to go ahead and remove this. So we're actually not going to use this. We're not going to need it because this is not really sufficient for Gen 5 cooling. Like, this is actually not. It's so bad actually that Gigabyte already has another revision of the Aorus Elite that has a better heatsink than this. So you can see, just to kind of show the difference in terms of how big this heatsink is. So I don't know if I'm going to really actually use this. I might test it, but if it ends up being way too loud, I'm not going to use it. It's funny how it's going to actually have to go upside down, the words. I think, yeah. So the cool thing about Gigabyte is they do have these toolless clips over here. If I zoom in, I'll show you guys. So Gigabyte motherboards for AM5, they have these kind of like toolless clips. You kind of open them up like that, see? So we've opened the clip, and then we're gonna go ahead and put this in. Trying to get, and then you just press that down and that's in. All right, so the Gen 5 drive is in. And then if you want to power this, they have the option to power it over SATA or old school Molex. Man, I haven't seen Molex in a long time. I'll probably power this off of a SATA port. So the AMD has been ahead of the curve when it comes to PCIe generation. So Zen 2 in 2019, so aka Ryzen 3000 series, they were the first to have PCIe Gen 4, which seems like it was way back now, and then they're also the first to have PCIe Gen 5 with the, AM4. So well, actually, if technically Intel's Alder Lake had support on Z690, however, only the graphics card slot had Gen 5. So if you wanted to do, like I said earlier, if you want to run Gen 5 drives like this on an Intel platform, you have to basically not use a graphics card like this, or you'll be stuck using the graphics card at, at most X8 or X4, which a lot of people are probably not going to like having to do that. Because then it sort of turns your GPU into an external GPU in terms of how many lanes, especially if it's on like an X4, because most of these new motherboards, they're only like 4 lanes down here electrically. In some cases, only 2 lanes. So, all right, well, let's go ahead and put this back in, and then we're going to boot it up and see what it's like. All right, so I've got everything reconnected, and then just to kind of show the drive down in there so you can see it's buried away, under the Noctua, between the Noctua and the Intel Arc GPU. I went ahead and I plugged in the power for this thing to one of my SATAs that goes up to my optical drive. Yes, that's right, I still have an optical drive with this old case. So I'm able to power the little fan off of the SATA connector. So I'm going to see like how loud that is. If it's very, very loud and annoying, and the temperatures are, like 40 C or whatever at full load, then I'm going to go ahead and disconnect it, and then we'll test how it runs without the fan, with the stock heatsink that comes with the drive, and we'll run some benchmarks to see how it does. I boot up the computer just to open it up here. That little fan is too loud, actually. I can hear it. I don't know if you guys will be able to see it. It's underneath, back in there. Well, let me see if I can get a light. There it is. Yeah, that thing's loud. So, alright, what I'll do is I will check the temperatures, and then I'm probably gonna like disconnect the fan and let it run with the passive cooling, the heatsink that it came with, right in there. There it is. You see, that thing is loud. Alright, so this is what it sounds like with the fan unplugged. You guys can see, well, right up there, I've disconnected the fan. So now that drive, the fan isn't spinning. So I will note that the PCIe Gen 5 SSD, where is it going to come in handy? Well, it would be a great boot drive for Windows, because if Windows has to use it as a paging file, the Gen 5 speeds are starting to get so fast that they're very close to like DDR3 speeds from, like almost a decade ago. So, yeah. So let's do some, what I'm probably going to do is I'm probably going to clone my Windows install, which is currently on an old, like, Samsung Evo 840 from like 2013 or something. So like a 10-year-old SSD, essentially. I'm going to clone it from there onto this Gen 5 drive, and then we're going to do some benchmarks after that, see how that goes. Alright, so I am doing a clone, so I'm cloning my old Samsung 840 Evo, you guys can see right here. So we're cloning this old SATA 2.5-inch SSD. It's like one of the older drives. And we're cloning this to this new one. It just shows up as PCIe. I didn't initialize or anything. We're using Macrum Reflect, the trial edition, to essentially clone everything over. So that's actually happening right now. If you guys want to see kind of what that process looks like, it's kind of over there. And then I've been looking at the temperatures because I'm not using that little fan on that heatsink, and so far it's doing pretty good. you can see right there, that's it. Total host writes 24 gig. There's basically nothing on this drive compared to like this other one here that has been written to quite a lot. So yeah, 43C right now, it's just passively cooled with just the standard airflow over it from the Noctua NHD15 and the front intake fans. But we will stress test it more later on. So right now, literally the bottleneck is the Samsung SATA SSD right here, as everything is basically going from here into the new Gen 5 SSD. So we'll be back here once it's cloned over. Once it's done, I'm gonna boot into this off of this drive. I'm gonna remove the Samsung Evo drive from the computer. I'm just gonna boot strictly off of this. And this PCIe Gen 5 drive will essentially become the boot drive. So it's the fastest one, the paging file advantage, everything. So yeah. Alright, so once you're in Windows, I've cloned my Windows install off the old Samsung 840 onto this PCIe Gen 5 drive, the inland TD510. You can see right here, sure enough, PCIe 5.0 X4. So the current mode, it is running at 5.0 4 lanes. The supported mode for the motherboard is 5.0 4 lanes. Okay, I just did a quick run on Crystal Disk Mark, the latest edition available. You can see our read and writes are both over 10 gigabytes per second, and then the random 4K 32 Qs numbers are here, and then the IOP numbers and the microsecond response time. I think this is the random 4K, yeah, the response time. So let's try to load up a game on here and see how fast this is. And keep in mind, these are the numbers without the fan connected. So what I've noticed is that the hottest this drive seems to get is right around 56 Celsius at full load, like while benchmarking. So you can see like the hottest it got was 56. And I believe the temperature warning threshold is around like 80, 85, 86 degrees. So a lot of margin there for it to still be able to heat up. But then like the idle power is less than 900 millivolts, or like 0.9 volts. So at full load it can get up to 11 watts of power, and that's the reason why it must have a pretty large heatsink on there to keep it cool. Okay, just to give you guys an idea, I'm moving Forspoken, which is like 122 gigs, from my Inland Prime Gen 3 SSD. You can see this is doing most of the work, but then the PCIe 5 SSD is receiving the install. But you can see the difference there between the two of them, because the Gen 3 drive is so much slower than the Gen 5 drive. The Gen 5 drive is just kind of you know, hanging out like, okay, yeah, give me that stuff, give me that stuff. So it's like it's going way, way faster on the receiving end, that we're actually bottlenecked on the Gen 3 side. So there we finally moved the game over. That was a pretty big game. You know, that's like a 120 gigabyte game. So you can see right there, 122 gigs. So the games are getting really, really big. And, you know, Forspoken is the first game to support direct storage. So we're going to see, like, if it actually benefits from having a Gen 5 SSD. Okay, let's see how fast this loads now. So we're going to click continue and see what happens. So, okay, that was like instant. Yeah. So the thing about this game that's unique is it is very heavy on the CPU and the SSD, because it makes use of Direct Storage 1.0. So whereas in Direct Storage 2.0, the GPU does the decompressing, in this version, in the older version, Direct Storage 1.0, the CPU does the decompression. And we are running this on an Intel Arc A770 with a Ryzen 7 7700X. So what I'll do is I'll just kind of teleport around, and what you'll notice is that when the game has to load things in, it utilizes the SSD. It's very, very heavy on the SSD, so you'll see a lot of like frame drops when that's happening. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to teleport around the map, and let's take a look and see what happens. So let's just fast travel to different places. Because watch, as soon as I fast travel, you should notice like latency spikes on the frame times. That's because it's having to pull from the SSD. So let's see if the Gen 5 SSD minimizes that. Oh wow, so you can see now it used to be a lot of like stuttery stuff from the SATA drive, but now it's just boom, it's like one big spike, then maybe a second one, and then you're there. So it does actually make a noticeable difference in terms of how smooth the transitions are from different locations. So this graphics card in particular is probably not the best one to showcase the game because it's not really that powerful for this game. So I guess we're running it at 1440p with FSR quality, but I mean that's kind of outside the scope of what we're looking at. We're looking at the storage capability of the SSD, and let's just teleport to another location. Let's just teleport over here. So wow, it's literally like one big blurb of like all the textures coming off the SSD, bam, just like that. So it does actually make a difference. So why is this interesting, you might ask, or why do we want to even like pay attention to Gen 5 SSDs? Well, I mean, it's kind of interesting because it's a newer technology, and you have to remember that we don't know, like, maybe the game industry leverages this sort of technology more and more in future games later on. I feel like this game, Forspoken in particular, is kind of like a pioneer sort of title. It's like kind of on the forefront of trying to test this newer technology and implement it. So, and it's a good thing for the industry, for gaming on PC in general, because, you know, the PlayStation 5 already has implemented this sort of technology, or a similar type of technology, with like the use of its custom controller and the NVMe Gen 4 specifications. So now we're in Gen 5 on these new AMD motherboards. So it's like we can actually leverage like the generation beyond the PlayStation 5. So it's kind of interesting stuff. So hope you guys found this video interesting. And if you have any questions, please leave a comment down below. And if you like this content, feel free to subscribe. It does motivate me to keep making more of these sort of like in-depth type videos. And I will see you guys in the next one. Thanks.